On this episode of BLT's Projects, we return to the Waverunners. Alright guys, we're back working on the Wave Venture, and we're going to go through a couple things that I'm going to work on today and see if that gives us any help. So, got the electrical box back in, solenoid hooked up and all that stuff. So if you're ever thinking, hey, how do I find a starter? Well, if you look here, this red wire right here goes out to the battery, and this red wire right here goes underneath, and if you follow that, you're going to find your starter underneath the exhaust. So I may have to get to that. One other thing I wanted to try to get to is this gear here. It's called the Ware, W-A-R-E gear. And my concern is I was wondering if the engine was seized up at all. And so the one thing I wanted to do is there's a little plastic cover that just sits on top of here, and it needs some bolts anyway, so it was just easy to take off. But this gear is what turns the crankshaft. So if I could take my hand and I can freely turn this, then it tells me that the engine at least wants to turn over and can turn over. So that'll make it worth it to at least take off this exhaust, which first you got to take this part off, and then this, you've got some hoses and bolts and stuff to take off. So we'll take some pictures of what everything looks like the way it is, and we'll get to it and be back in a bit. Guys, welcome back. Got the exhaust off. It has a hose here with the hard inlet, has the rubber hose with the hard inlet here, and then the hose down there for the exhaust to go out. If you're looking at it, you've got a bracket that fits over this that kind of goes just like that over the bolts, so it kind of sits over all of them just like that. It may not look like it needs to come out, but you may as well go ahead and take it out. And then there are two bolts right here, one here and one here, that actually hold the exhaust to the cylinder head. And then there are two bolts right here and right here that hold that bracket onto the exhaust. So once you get this out of the way, you have got the starter in between here. So if you guys can kind of see that, and the starter wires right here, kind of jiggling it with my hand. Then you have the exhaust manifold. Looks like you probably have maybe 8 bolts to get that off, and then you have free access to the starter. Getting this exhaust out was quite tedious. You just have to know that this brake is here, and then once you get that, you can loosen up these two rubber. Once you loosen this up, and then that seal comes off, you're good to go, because that just all fits together like that. So we'll clean this exhaust up, make it look all new and shiny, and get the engine cleaned up, and we will get to working on that exhaust and see if that starter is the problem. So we'll be back. Just a quick note, these top bolts here, 4 of those are 14 millimeter. These bolts here are 12 millimeter, and the exhaust bolts, and there's 8 of them, are 12 millimeter. Just so you guys know what sizes you'll need as you go along. And the bolts that hold the electrical box on are 12 millimeter as well. Okay, all right, we'll see you in a bit. All right, guys, got the exhaust manifold off. You have 8 bolts to take it off. These bottom 4 bolts are real kind of difficult to get to, so be careful with that. But after you get those off, you just have to gently pry it off the block, and it'll come off. And then you have your starter down here, and you just got to wiggle and pry that out of there. And I will show you guys how to bench test this once I get it out. You have a nut here, a bolt here, and a bolt there. Those bolts are 12 millimeter, and that top positive, the top cable where your positive wire goes, is a 10 millimeter. All the bolts on your exhaust manifold are 12s. And then once you get that off, make sure you take note of this T. So this top part goes to the valve cover, that goes to the exhaust, and then that goes out of the bike. So just know that. Make sure you take pictures of that and know where it is. So I'll have to get the rest of this gasket material off here. I already got a new exhaust manifold gasket on the way. So we'll get that installed. And just looks like a metal gasket that just sits on there. I don't think there's really any particular way. So anyway, so that's it. So we'll get that starter out of there and go from there. See you guys in a bit. All right, so finally got the starter out. So with waiting on parts and stuff, we're going to do a couple things today. We're going to go ahead and prep the gasket surfaces, clean them up and get them ready to go. And we're also going to take a vacuum and get a lot of the extra water and dirt and debris out from underneath this engine. So not too big of a deal, but just some simple cleanup and prep. That way when the new starter gets here, we can just put some oil on it, stick it in, hook it up, and get ready to go. Whenever you're using a vacuum, or if you're going to maybe use a hose or something, I would recommend covering up any surfaces that you can get water in, like your exhaust, intake, or anything like that. That way you don't get water in the engine, because the whole point is to keep it out. So anyway, so once we get the parts in, we'll get them installed. Alright guys, as we continue our troubleshooting of the Waverunner, we have our two starters. This starter is the one I pulled out of the Waverunner, and this starter is a brand new one that's going to go in. We're going to talk about troubleshooting a starter, kind of what to look for, and actually how to troubleshoot a starter. So before we go into the actual how, a couple safety things. When you troubleshoot a starter, there's more than likely going to be some sparks and heat that are going to come off that positive side of the starter when you troubleshoot it. So don't have this around any gas, oil, anything flammable, and we want to be safe. I recommend not only do you have the starters in a safe place, but you use gloves to protect your hands and safety glasses so that you protect your eyes. All you need to do to troubleshoot a starter is really basically very simple things. You need the starters themselves and a power source. And we're going to just use this battery pack. And I'll show you exactly how to do that. Now, your starter basically is real simple. It has a positive side and then a negative. On the Waverunner, it has a negative cable that bolts there to ground it. And then the positive. And what happens is when you turn on your solenoid, and this is one of our solenoids from our Waverunner, the power comes into the battery and then goes out through the solenoid on the positive side. So the power comes into the battery, and then it opens this up and it makes the connection here, which is the click we heard in the previous video. The power goes out and starts the starter. And that's it. That's all it is. Pretty simple. So, when I first took out this starter, when I first took the starter out, the first thing you're going to want to look for is any broken seals or anything. And this seal looks pretty good. It does look like there could have been some areas where water maybe got in. But overall, you know, it's not in bad shape. So the first thing your starter is freely spin. And as I turn this, there shouldn't really be any resistance in this. And that's how you can tell a starter's going bad, if there's any resistance. So if you look at this one and I turn it, it just turns freely. I don't have to really put any effort into it to get it to turn. That's one way to tell whether your starter is good or bad. Now I can tell you, and I'll show you, that once I put power to both of these, they're gonna turn. But I'm gonna show you how to just double check that. But it's really this ability to free spin that you're really looking for. Okay, and this one spins with quite a bit of resistance versus this one. I mean, there's just no resistance there at all. So when you pull off your starter, that's the first thing you can do. And now I'll show you how to troubleshoot. I'll show you actually how to connect it to a power source and you know, see if it's going to turn over that way. Because sometimes if starters are just totally bound up, they're not going to do anything. So you take your power source, really very simple. And like I said, we're just using this battery pack. So you take a negative and you put it on a post. Any post will do. Doesn't make any difference. And you take your positive, and you're not going to attach this. You're just going to, how we're going to do it, so you've got your negative hooked up, and then all you're going to do is just touch this to your power source, and you'll see it come on. So we'll turn the battery pack on, and you should see a spark as well. Just like that. See how that didn't turn on at all? See how it's not really spinning if we touch it? Okay. It is a little bit, but it's not a whole lot. And so if this side isn't spin at all and doesn't come on at all, then you know it's bad. Okay. Do it just a couple more times there. Right. And that's it. That's how you troubleshoot to see if a starter is totally bound up or not. Pretty simple. So we're going to go ahead and get this new starter on the Waverunner, and we'll get going. One other quick note is when you buy parts, try to get the original part and make sure it matches up exactly. And this one does. I had bought another starter off eBay that had said it worked, and it was actually the wrong kind. And that happens sometimes. So just always double check your fitment before purchase. So we'll get this on the Waverunner and see if we can get it to turn over. See you guys in a bit.